opioid crisis sweeping across the country claimed more lives this weekend.
Every day brings another story about the depth of this country's opioid crisis. Overdoses up, emergency services overwhelmed, another family burying a
We are back now with a deep dive into one of the most serious crises facing people in this country, overdoses. They're now the #1 killer of people under the age of 50. More people die from that than from car crashes, HIV, or gun deaths.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the opioid epidemic is getting worse. In 45 states, emergency room visits for overdoses are up 30%, and there are virtually no signs of it.
The nation's opioid crisis remains a slow-moving disaster, responsible for some 40,000 overdose deaths in America last year.
All right, Manic Asylum back here. This is the butterfly effect of drug and alcohol addiction. This will be part 1. In my introduction, I used my sister. She does not exactly fall into the drug and alcohol addiction category. She was certainly dabbling. She was an 18-year-old young girl that was out having fun, doing things that 18-year-olds do. She was enjoying life and having fun with her friends, and drugs and alcohol obviously are in the mix of that. She was by far an addict of any kind. However, Sage is a perfect precursor for me to kick this off with, because she is kind of a signification of the end result. So people write books about things like addiction and what it does to the family and to the individuals. What I want to do here is kind of tell my story a little bit, kind of how I came up, the things that I went through, the transgressions that our family went through, and how it completely demolished everything and everything around us. I want to hopefully do this to maybe help other people, other young people that may be going through a similar situation, to understand that these things are beyond their control. When it comes to your parents, it turned me into somebody that was driven by anger, by emotion. I was angry, I was sad, I was pissed off at the world, I hated everything and everyone in it, and I felt like a victim. That seems to be a big common thing these days, that everybody is claiming victimhood, and it's something that I often preach to my children. Do not allow yourself to be a victim to anything. These are circumstances that you are going through. You will get through them. Be a survivor, be a fighter, be the person that is just taking it and running with it. It's easier said than done, but I think the main point is to not be a victim. Don't consider yourself a victim. Consider yourself a fighter and a survivor that has gotten through shit, or that is going through shit, that is fighting through shit. Do not be a victim. And this is a mantra I repetitiously preach to my children. So what I want to do here is it's a little bit of kind of my history and my upbringing. All right, you're gonna learn a little bit about me. We'll start off with a very brief summary of my upcoming, and I'll introduce you to my biological father that I had never met, that died of a heroin addiction, my stepfather that died of a heroin overdose, my little sister that, if you may or may not know, died at 18 years old in a drunk driving car accident. So as you can see, these things are kind of full circle. My mother is not excluded, and this is a reflection piece. I want to tell my story, and I want it to be able to maybe, hopefully, help at least one person. Maybe somebody can see this and see that somebody else has gone through it and came out of it on the other end, a little banged up, a little rough around the edges, but still fucking kicking ass. Alright, so roll with me and let's get this shit started, shall we? here, lonely and cold. No sense of human connections, no sense of home. I roamed through the labyrinth of dark hallways, chasing an illusion. I thought I saw an angel opening her arms to me within my confusion. I dream of her often. Beautiful blue and white wings keep her afloat as she illuminates everything around her, as if her mere presence evokes joy and happiness upon her surroundings. She moves in slow motion, floating gently through the air as she slowly approaches. And as she places her hand over my heart, she says in the most beautiful heavenly voice, "I sense much pain in you, my child." Yes, I reply. I'm tired of this life. All the using, all the lies, all the confusion, the disguises, the delusions deep inside, and I refuse to keep on fighting in this fight that isn't mine. With all the crying in my nights, all my desires and my sights are sliding by, 'cause I'm to hide or rise above this dying life, and I'm afraid. Imprisoned in this cage on this imaginary stage where I just rant and I just rave and no one listens, no one stays. Take me away, I hate this place. I hate this cage, I hate this maze. I hate the darkness of these days. I hate this rage inside me blazing. Memories that just keep fading. I'm insane, no one can save me from this pain. Please, angel, take me. And as I open my eyes in anticipation of some kind of comforting words from the angel, she's gone, leaving behind the hope that perhaps one day she'll return to set me free. That was a piece of poetry that I wrote as a very young man when I felt very alone and I felt very shunned and I felt like there was no one to go to or no way out. So you can interpret it the way that you want to. That's what art is about. But that's the state of mind that I was in when I wrote that. I was very young when I wrote that. I was born to a woman at the age of 18. And my father, I believe, was in his mid-20s, if I'm not mistaken. Their marriage did not last long. They ended up splitting up. My father was a heroin addict. He, about 4 years after, 2 or 3 or 4 years, I don't know, it's hazy, after he left my mother, or they split up rather, he contracted the HIV virus from injecting heroin and hepatitis C and all that good stuff that you get from repeatedly injecting heroin. So my mother was still very young. She was still kind of in her social days or partying days. So I ended up staying with my great-grandparents for about 10 years of my life. The first 10 years of my life-ish. I went back and forth a couple times living with her and her boyfriends, and it would never work out, and I would always end up back there. Around the time I was, I want to say 11 or 12 years old, is when my mother found Mike, my stepfather. They got together and we ended up moving in together, all of us. I was very happy to be out of my grandmother's house because she was a damn tyrant. She was very authoritarian. She was a very authoritarian parental person. She did not like me to have friends. She did not like me to go outside for too long and play. Really wasn't allowed to be a kid, you know. So I was pretty much stuck in my room with the very few toys I had and MTV, pretty much, music and radio, and that's kind of what I threw myself into, is music. I can still remember as a young boy standing in front of that mirror fantasizing about becoming a rock star. Now once I moved in with my stepfather and my mother, it was smooth for a very short amount of time. Things started to really crank up pretty quickly. Mike was an alcoholic. My mother did some drinking, but she loved her pills, and the fights would ensue, and it got to the point to where every other weekend the police were at our house for domestic violence, and I saw some very horrific, ugly things. I will be making a Patreon video that will go dive deeper into some of the things that went down that I'd rather not go through on YouTube. So if you want to subscribe to my Patreon, I'll leave a link, but there's some things I'd rather not say on YouTube. However, the drugs and alcohol really did a number. They weren't the type of people that could take drugs and alcohol and self-sustain. They weren't functional drinkers, or they weren't functional addicts by any stretch of the imagination. We lived in this apartment complex, and there would be nights where, you know, my mother would threaten to kill herself, and she would lie in the streets to get hit by a car. There were times we'd have to hide the knives in the house from her. Very embarrassing moments where I'd be walking with a group of my friends and we'd hear whimpering from bushes, and that would be my mother in the bushes, and I would have to help her home. So these were very embarrassing times and very ugly times. And I do wish to put a disclaimer on this. I myself, which I will get into within this series, was also a long-time drug addict, and I did some heinous things myself. All right, so I do not by any means say these things pointing the finger, but I digress. The fighting didn't cease, and it was a very rough situation to be in as a young man, and it was very embarrassing, because I had friends and they would have to see it as well. So after quite some time of this going on, my mother ended up pregnant with my little sister. During all this, I was really starting to get beaten down from it. It was really starting to take its toll on me. I ended up in the streets, fucking around with gangs. I ended up in GD. I ended up running around with Folk Nation and just doing nothing but getting into trouble. I was arrested twice by the time I was 13 years old, and that just continued throughout my years in and out of jail. So I certainly wasn't stable at the time either. So once they got pregnant with Sage, they made the decision to get married. Brilliant idea, considering the state of their relationship. But they got married. So they got married. We ended up moving into another place, and there were times that it would cool down for very, very short periods. But I would say 95% of the time it was absolute chaos. It was drinking and getting fucked up and screaming and shouting at each other and getting physical. Mike would not beat or hit my mother. It was my mother that was the aggressor consistently. I remember times where I saw my mom grab him by a handful of his hair and beat him in the face. And when he left the house, she would begin beating her own face for when the cops came to blame it on him. Now Mike wasn't really a man's man. He was more of a beta kind of guy. He didn't have the faculties really to be a father, at least not to a young man. I couldn't look to him for fatherly advice or anything like that. He was a bit shallow. But I don't take anything away from Mike for that, because Mike had a heart full of love. He loved us. He cared for us deeply, and I believe that was just part of his personality. And it took me it took me a while to really grasp that and understand that. But the times that, there were times that, my mother would do things like call the police on me and tell them that I was selling drugs out of their house. And the only thing that I had back in the day was my room. I took pride in my room. I made it really nice, and I set it up really nice. And when she did that and the cops came and tossed my room, I completely snapped, and I grabbed a baseball bat and I busted out all the windows in the car. Because damn it, that was my room, and that was the only thing I had. Well, I was probably about 16 at that age. And I'm going to skip over a lot of things, because there's tons and tons of hours upon hours that I could talk about different things that went on, but I'll keep it brief here. So as Sage was starting to get a little bit older, obviously the consistent bickering and fighting amongst them would not stop, and the violence, and there would be times where they would split up. And when they did split up, Sage was my mother's bargaining chip, and she would use her against him and not let him see her, and eventually she got my stepfather locked up in prison. Not a man that deserved to be in prison by any stretch of the imagination. I was a complete lost soul at this point. I was completely lost and deep into my drug addiction already. Couldn't have been more than 17, 18 years old maybe when this happened, but my recollection of time is a bit foggy, probably because of all the drugs I did when I was younger. I saw some very heinous things that went on in the household that really disturbed me because of the type of person that I am. I just don't think life should be lived in that manner. And I told Mike so many times, just leave, man. Please, just leave. But, Michael, he loved that little girl so much, you couldn't tell him nothing. He would just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And it was always the same damn thing. Mike wasn't perfect. You know, he was pretty much a fuck up on a lot of things. He made a lot of mistakes. He made a lot of dumb decisions. He wasn't the brightest guy in the world. But god damn it, that man loved his family. And once I collected that, once I realized that, it really started to bother me. It really started to eat me up. Because after a while, it got to the point to where there was nothing he could do right. Absolutely nothing. And this was not just my mother, you know. This was my mother and her family, her whole family. Except for maybe my aunt. That would just team up on him and just completely kick him while he was down. Constantly, never offering a hand up, never saying, all right, let's get through this, never sitting down to make a plan, never sitting down to say, hey, all right, we fucked up, we got to make some decisions here, we got to move forward. I don't care who you are. If you're not hurting anybody, and if you're a person with love in your heart, and you're caring, and you're trying, you don't deserve that kind of treatment. Mike was an alcoholic, but it wasn't long until he turned to pills. And that's when shit really went downhill and everything really started to spiral out of control. Alright, I thank you guys for watching. A reminder, this is part 1 of a series, so I will be diving deeper into these past circumstances and situations. This is a bit compartmentalized, which is definitely why I have to do it in parts or chapters. There will be at the end one on myself and criticizing myself of all the things that I've done and all the mistakes that I have made as well. I am not impervious to criticism of my own, and I'm probably my own worst critic. So if you choose to stick around for that will be an interesting one. Like I said, these videos take some time to make. I will be doing a more uncut version, a little bit more personal version for my Patreon supporters. So if you choose to join the militia and Patreon, I will provide a link below, and once those videos are done and polished up, they will be up and posted for my Patreons. And I thank you very much to my Patreons for your support. It means the world to me. Also, one more disclaimer, this is all past tense, you understand? I consistently criticize myself for my past misdoings and my past fuck-ups, alright? So I am in no way speaking on the character or likeness of anybody at this moment now. We all make mistakes, we all fuck up, we all do shit that we regret in life. Hindsight is 20/20. These things are to be learned from. And anybody out there that is dealing with a certain situation like this, I hope that you take away something good from this, that you can help push you through these things. I have to tell my story first. Once I'm done telling my story, then we can get into how I dealt with it in the wrong way, and how I finally started to deal with it in the right way. So thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next chapter. Much love.